Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this professional development webinar on behalf of AAST East and SCC PBS. Tonight, we'll be talking about dollars and cents of finances and financial planning as a junior and mid-level surgeon. We have two great speakers today. We have Dr. Thomas Duncan and Dr. Stephanie Bonne, who will be each speaking on different topics, and we'll allow time for questions between each presentation. So I encourage everyone to type in questions into the chat, and then I'll make sure that those questions get answered. Dr. Bonne will be presenting first. Dr. Bonne is a graduate from the Rosalind Franklin University. She did her training at the University of Illinois Metropolitan Group in Chicago, and then did her fellowship training at Washington University in St. Louis. She's currently faculty at Rutgers New Jersey Medical School in Newark, New Jersey. And Dr. Thomas Duncan did his medical training at Midwestern University. He then did his residency at King June Medical Center in California. And he is currently the co-medical director at Anna Kappa Surgery Associates in Ventura, California, as well as trauma medical director at Ventura County Medical Center. So let's begin. And again, feel free to put your questions in the chat.
All right, good, Rachel, you can see my screen? Yeah, okay, great. So thank you for the introduction. I'm gonna start. I'm Stephanie Bonne, as Dr. Sheikh said, and I want to just sort of start out by saying, like, I don't necessarily have any expertise in this other than what I've done and what's worked for me, and really listening to my financial planner and the people that I work, I know in the business world, including my husband, and learning about business and finance. So I think that, one of the sort of disclosures is that, how your finances and how you handle your finances is an intensely personal decision. And so sometimes people, will say, oh, well, the way that I do it and, whatever, but and then be sort of like deeply offended when you don't do it their way or have some differing opinion. So there's lots of different ways that you can handle your money. This is what has worked for me, and this is what I sort of have come to understand about things like paying off loans, et cetera. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I don't have any relevant actual financial disclosures. I'm going to talk about your benefits a little bit that you get from your employer and your investments, understanding a couple sort of theories or general thoughts about investment, paying off your student loans, saving for retirement, kids, and long-term planning, and then estate planning. And then Dr. Duncan's going to talk a little bit more about payment and reimbursement. So I think there's sort of two philosophies of personal finance that I find in the world. One is live like a resident when you finish your training, pay down your debt, sleep better at night, and overall over the course of your life, you're going to pay less interest if you do that. The other sort of theory is you can make your money work for you. When you do that, you increase your net worth and potentially improve your retirement, but you have to sort of understand how that works and why that works. And so you feel like, oh, but I'm paying all this interest, but actually, if you can make more with that money than what you're paying in your interest on your debt, then you can actually keep low interest debt for a long period of time and still come out ahead, which is a little bit counterintuitive. So the first thing you should do when you're done training and when you're, early in your career is take care of the basics. This is the rainy day tragedy. If something terrible happens to you where you either can't work or you die, that the people in your life are going to be taken care of, or that you're going to be taken care of. So thinking about life insurance, for example, who needs what if you die tomorrow? So there are some decisions that need to be made when you think about your life insurance. So who depends on you for the money that you make? do you have enough money that your family can bury you? I mean, that's a kind of one thing. The next thing is your dependents. Do you have a spouse that depends on your income? Do you have children that depend on your income? Do you have parents that depend on your income? For me, I have 3 kids, so I have life insurance that provides for what I would make until they turn 18. I have no intention of supporting my kids after they turn 18, period. And so I'm not buying enough life insurance to support them until they're 50, because even whether I'm dead or alive, they're on their own at 18. So, but some people want to support their kids into their, 30s or 40s. Or maybe have kids who are going to need to be supported. And so that your life insurance and how much life insurance you purchase is going to depend on some of those sort of soul searching questions. You may also want to think about elder dependents like your parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles who may be depending on you for long-term care or care after they retire. And one other sort of philosophical question is, does your partner continue to work? So if you're in some sort of partnership, marriage, et cetera, something happened to you, are you just making up the income that you would make? Or are you making it so that do you want to buy enough life insurance so that they don't actually have to work? Because maybe they're going to be then, caring for children or caring for parents or whatever. So how much life insurance you purchase is going to depend on that. Now, you also make assumptions when you purchase life insurance that life insurance payout will then be invested. So for example, I have life insurance that insures me for about $2 million. Well, $2 million is not what I'm going to make the remainder of my career. But if you took $2 million and invested it creates essentially an endowment that then should return roughly what I would make for the rest of my career, or till my kids turn 18. There's a lot out there about life insurance products and whether you should do term versus whole life. And I know that Dr. Duncan's going to talk to this a little bit longer, a little bit more, but life insurance, you generally want to choose a term insurance plan. So these are very cheap plans. This is something that you're paying a couple dollars out of your paycheck for, because you're a good bet, right? Probably nothing's going to happen to you when you're 30, 40 years old. And then so you're paying very little into the system, because the life insurance companies are betting on the fact that they're probably not going to have to make a payout on you. But then you don't accumulate any benefit. So by the time you're 65, your life insurance policy is basically worthless, but you do have that rainy day coverage if something were to happen to you young. Whole life insurance gains value over time, but is very expensive and does not gain value as well as it does in the market. So it's generally not considered to be a good plan. There are some complex products out there. So if tax sheltering your money is something that's important to you, then once you've tax sheltered all of your money through things like 401ks and backdoor Roths and other things that we're going to talk about, then there are some complex products out there that use the tax benefit of a life insurance policy. So it's a life insurance policy with an investment policy put on top of it that have the tax benefit of the life insurance and then accrue in a pre-tax way. These are really complicated products though, and I would really suggest that you speak to a financial advisor if you plan on using something like that. Disability insurance. So life insurance and disability are generally going to be provided by your employer. You really want to carefully read your employer sponsored policies. Most disability insurance has a lot that's, your blanket sort of provided by your employer is going to be probably not adequate. So like, for example, I work for a state institution. My employer sponsored disability is about $2,500 a month if I was disabled, which is, not anything close to what I make. So I have, supplemental disability on top of that if I were disabled for a period of time, I can get additional disability insurance, and I pay for that every month or every quarter, I think I send a check to the disability company. That for me was a policy that I hung on to from medical school, which is really nice because it was, I got it when it was very cheap. And then I've, been able to maintain that over time. So you likely are going to need some sort of supplemental disability, but you want to read, what you have. The other thing is that these life insurance and disability policies that are provided by your employer are typically provided on whatever your base salary is. So if you have a large component of your salary that is like an RVU bonus or is some sort of productivity driven portion that's variable salary, it's very likely that your disability and your life insurance is based on whatever your base salary is. So be careful, because if you do have a large clinical or variable component, then you may find yourself that you're relatively underinsured. Long-term care insurance is probably not something that you need early on. It's something that you want to start thinking about when you're closer to retirement. You don't need long-term care insurance when you're in your 30s or 40s, but you might want to consider taking out a policy on your elder dependents. So if you're in the sandwich generation and you anticipate that you're going to be taking care of elderly parents or in-laws or grandparents, you may want to take out a long-term care policy on them that you pay for. And it essentially keeps you from being in a position of having to pay out for them later. And then you want to make sure that you have a rainy day fund. And so, different people will tell you different amounts that they're comfortable with. Some people say you should be able to live 6 months without working. Other people say a year, but you should have some sort of liquid funds. And this is going to be a combination of your checking and savings accounts that you keep at your bank. And then things like money market accounts that you can rapidly liquidate. Money market, you can usually get the money out. It carries a higher, it makes money. You get a higher interest rate on it than you do on like a savings account, but it takes like 2 days to liquidate it. So it's a good choice for things like if you want to create like a big rainy day fund. And then sometimes you can like get to a point where if there's enough money in that, you can start like basically financing your own purchases, which is kind of cool. Like, so if you have $150,000 sitting in your rainy day account, you want to buy a car, just go buy a car instead of paying like a 8% interest rate on an auto loan, and then you just pay yourself back over the next couple of years, months, whatever, and then that's essentially interest-free money. Protect your assets. So this is really important. You want to make sure that you're protected as well. So make sure that you have a malpractice policy that is sufficient. This is particularly important if you're in private practice. And I don't know as much about this because I've always worked in a university system, but I know many people in private practice consider forming an LLC. And so an LLC is like, instead of being Stephanie Bonne MD, I'm Stephanie Bonne MD Incorporated, or LLC, and that company, then you make like your husband or your mom or your cousin or whatever the board, and then you essentially pay yourself a salary out of this LLC, which is the holding company for your whatever you bring in, whether it's your revenue from your practice, or also, there's other ways that people make money, right? So we do, if you do expert witness things, and so some people even form an LLC, even who have malpractice, like not for malpractice reasons. So, for example, I have an LLC for like any additional like money that I make doing other things. And then what happens is that I can use that as a second tax sheltering. So I'm allowed to put the additional minimum. So it's $18,000 at my age, it goes up to $21,000 when you, I think age 50 or 55, that I can still tax shelter that money into my IRA out of the LLC, in addition to the money that I'm tax sheltering from my regular income. And then you always want to make sure that you have things like homeowners insurance, auto insurance, if you have a boat, your toys, whatever, you need to have all of that insured. So the first thing that you want to do is get rid of your high interest debt. If you have credit card debt, get rid of it. I mean, pay off your credit cards. That is, really high interest debt. And then you want to pay off your debts according to your highest interest rates. So if you have an auto loan that's at 6%, your student loans are at 4%, then pay off your car. If you, have a mortgage that's higher than your student loans, then maybe you want to make additional payments on your principal to bring down your mortgage and change the amortization curve of your mortgage. So these are ways that you can make yourself more money by paying things down as you're able. But what you don't necessarily want to do is pay off all your debt. And this is a really interesting sort of curve to think about and look at very carefully. So this is the market volatility for every year since the stock market crashed in 1929. And so you can see there was a lot of volatility in the Great Depression, but because of a lot of the way the markets have stabilized over time and the way that market volatility has changed, you can see that if you have time, like an entire lifetime, like decades, you're going to experience changes in the stock market. But in general, over time, you're going to make about 4%. That is been consistent for years and years and years. And this is what the financial advisors bank on when they're investing your money. And so, at a younger age, you can sort of afford to invest in funds that are a little bit higher risk, but then at an older age, you may want to have less risky funds. And so, and that you're going to make a slightly lower interest rate on, but in general, you can expect to make about 4% in the market. Well, if you're making 4% in the market and you have a student loan that is consolidated at 2.2%, it's actually better to put your money in the market than it is to pay down that student loan. And so this is an example of that. So if you have a graduate student, if you have $100,000 in student loans at 4%, you pay $2,000 a month to your student loans, and then you wait to make any investments until you're debt free, then you're debt free quickly and you've paid less interest. But if you put $1,000 to your student loans, which is probably what your minimum payment is, and then you take the other $1,000 and invest it, you're actually going to come out ahead. You're going to pay more interest, but you will come out ahead over time because you're putting that money in the market and the interest is compounding. So that is sort of the like hold on to your low interest debt theory of investments. This is not what you will hear from like White Coat Investor, or if you guys are in like there's like a physician Facebook group of finance. A lot of people are really interested in paying down their debt, and some people just can't stand to hold debt. And it's like they just can't sleep at night. And if that's you, then that's your theory of investing. But what's personally worked for me is this, which has been to do this. But you have to be disciplined and actually invest. So you can't take the $1,000 a month, pay off your student loans, and then spend $1,000 just buying things. You have to be disciplined and actually invest that money, or this strategy doesn't work. And so you can see, same thing here. So if you pay down your loans versus investing the same amount, you end up in this compounded interest, and then you get this, you end up with profit. And the profit here you can see is $5,800 versus the interest paid, which is $3,175. So it's actually better to invest than it is to pay down your low interest loans. The other thing I just want to briefly mention, because it's a hot topic right now, is the student loan forgiveness. This is going to be probably a very fleeting thing because the federal government doesn't have enough budget to sustain this program. But right now you can go to fedloans.com if you've made 120 qualifying payments, which is 10 years. And then you can consolidate your loans under a federal servicing program. So if you consolidated them way back in the day under something like Navient or Sallie Mae, you have to reconsolidate now under the federal student loan servicing program. And then you can apply for public student loan forgiveness if you've worked in a qualified institution and made 10 years of payments. But there are other forgiveness options out there, through various state programs and military and, all kinds of other ways. But your goal overall is that you want to increase your net worth. So that's really what you should be working on every year. And when you meet with a financial advisor or when you review your financial commitments every year, you should be thinking about what your net worth is. And your net worth is very easy to calculate. It's your assets minus your liabilities. So your assets are, you know, how much money do you have in all your bank accounts? How much retirement savings do you have? What's in your kids' college funds or whatever? What is your real estate equity? So how much equity do you have in your home and your cars and all those kinds of other things? And then your liability is whatever debt you have, your personal debt, your student debt, and whatever is remaining on your mortgage. As long as your net worth, if you divide one year by the previous year, is higher than the interest rates on your loans, then you're doing fine. So, you know, if your net worth every year, your growth of your net worth is more than 4%, then you're probably doing, or is more than whatever your student loan or auto loan or mortgage rate is, then you're doing the right thing and you should continue to invest. And then you want to do something called rebalancing. So a lot of people just like put money into like whatever retirement account you get through your employer and then just like let it be, right? It's growing, you have retirement, you're all taken care of. But where you actually make money in the market is if you rebalance. And this gets a little bit complicated. If you're not comfortable with it, this is something that a financial advisor can do for you. But basically what it says is that, you know, there are some investments that are going to rise very steeply and others are going to go down. And what you want to do is take the things that are high, sell them, and then buy whatever's low, because whatever low is probably going to go up again. And this is a little dicey with like individual stocks, but when you look at the performance of portfolios and particular investment mechanisms over time, this strategy actually works. And then you end up with having net worth go up because you're rebalancing into you're rebalancing into something that's going to then go up again. And without getting, you know, too complicated, this is sort of what this ends up looking like. So, you know, you invest over here and then it goes up, and then you rebalance out of your high, you know, whatever's high into whatever's lower. And then your rebalanced portfolio actually ends up ahead over time, even though it experiences the same sort of market volatility. And then also just think about your about 529s if education is in your goals. So again, this is something where you need to think about your goals. Do you plan on paying for college for a child or a niece or nephew or you know, friend, whatever? You can open a 529 on anybody. And what's really nice about 529s is whatever the portfolio earns over time is tax-free. So whatever accrues, whatever interest is accrued in that portfolio over time, it becomes, you know, capital that is not taxed. The only sort of downside of it is you have to use it for education, and there are some restrictions on it. So a lot of people worry about like, am I going to oversave into my 529? Probably not. So for a child born today, they recommend if you're going to pay for 4 years of like somewhere average between state and private university, you probably need to save about $1,000 to $1,200 a month into a 529 that includes the accrual. Because remember, you only have 18 years until the kid is going to go to college. So, but this is also where sort of your value system, and you need to examine like, am I also going to pay for graduate school or professional school for my kids, or is it just 4 years? And so that's also going to weigh into your decisions about how much money you put into a 529. And then you can see you get this tax deferred investment. So, you know, over 15 years, this is with an initial $65,000 investment that has earned $30,000, and there's no taxes on that $30,000. So that's great. And then you spend it for school and you haven't paid any taxes on it. You do not have to invest in, so the other advantage of 529s is that many states have a state tax benefit. And so you can see over here with the map, there's no benefits in California, there's no state tax benefits in these other states, but you do get a tax deduction, a tax credit, or a tax parity in all of those other states. So most of you probably live in a state where at the very least, you're going to get a tax deduction on your state income taxes for money that you put into your 529. The other thing that you should know about 529s is you don't have to invest in the state in which you live. So you can live in New York and invest in the Virginia 529. And so you want to look at the highest performing accounts over time, because each state has, diversified their portfolio differently. And in general, it's considered Illinois, Michigan, and Utah are probably the highest, have been the highest performing historically over the last couple of decades. Virginia is also quite good, in New York as well. All right, choosing a financial advisor. So this is also an intensely personal decision, and I'm just telling you what I've done and have been happy with. But I have chosen a financial advisor that has a fiduciary duty. So that means that they do not make any financial recommendations on which they make a commission. So they're not selling me any life insurance products or IRA products or any type of investment product on which they earn a commission for getting me into that particular investment. And then he makes money based on how much is in our portfolio. So we pay him based on the worth of our portfolio, which means if we make money, he makes more money. So that, and the rate actually goes down over time. So as we accrue more wealth, we pay a lower rate, but it's still a higher number, absolute number over time. And so that's what we've chosen to do. These are sort of the two types of financial advisors. So you have a broker dealer. This is going to be somebody who says, hey, I work for Prudential and I want to get you into these, Prudential life insurance plan or whatever. And they're earning a commission for getting you in there, which is why, and that's a conflict of interest. And then there's registered investment advisors who are held to that fiduciary standard and have to, they make recommendations based on what's best for you. And you're like, well, why would I not choose a fiduciary? And I mean, it's really just up to you. And many are hybrids. Many fiduciary advisors will also earn a commission on the products, but they have to inform you what what they're going to get if they get you into this product, and declare that conflict of interest. So, this is basically what you do, see what you need financial advice on, learn about the different kinds of advisors that there are, see how they get paid. And that's really important. How are they making money from you? Do you need a fiduciary? And then you should meet with them, and it should be a several time process, 3 or 4 times before you actually put any, money in, where they're explaining to you exactly what they're doing with your money. And then these are the expectations that you should have. They will talk to you about, do you care if you pay taxes? Do you not want to pay taxes? It's really important for you to tax shelter. Then they're going to put into more tax sheltered things if you don't really mind paying taxes. And you want, they'll also sort of assess your risk aversity. Are you willing and open to take risks and put your money into more risky investments, or are you like a super safe investor and never want to lose any money? And so they'll give you all of this advice about, retirement planning, et cetera. They will help you with your taxes, but they do not do your taxes. That's an accountant. And so that's different. And then you should think about your will and your estate. So a will has 3 parts: what happens to you, what happens to your dependents, and what happens to your money and assets. So what happens to you is, this is the person who's going to make decisions for me if I'm sick. What happens to your dependents is, if you have children under 18 or some sort of other dependent, what's going to happen to them? Who's going to be charged with taking care of them if you die? And then what happens to your money and your assets? So, who's going to get what kind of money and what kind of restrictions? And you can put all kinds of things on there. The contingencies for death of your beneficiaries, when your kids can get money when they turn 18, either they get it right away, do the people who are going to be taking care of them. So you can come up with all of these contingencies and put that all in your will. And a good estate planning attorney will meet with you a bunch of times to get this all straightened out. The other things you might want to consider is creating a trust. So a trust is good. And then you may want to consider philanthropy on your death. Do you want to leave something to a cause that's important to you? And then this is what you need to know about trusts. So if you form a living trust, you will avoid probate on your death. So your money and your house and all of those things won't have to go through probate, which is very costly. And then you get some asset protection as well. You don't, you avoid attorney fees and things like that. So basically your money, so upon your death, your money gets put into a trust, and then your will outlines how your trust is going to be distributed. And that is, in general, a better way to avoid a lot of hairy things happening after your death. If you don't, even if you have sort of like a direct dependent, like it's just you and one dependent, and obviously everything's going to go to them, it's still good to have a trust, so that it goes into the trust and then the trust is distributed to them. I'm going to skip over this to let Thomas get started. I'm happy to take questions. I'm not sure if we're doing now or at the end, but I see a couple in the chat.
Thank you, Dr. Bonnie. That was excellent. So, Doctor, I'm just going to go through the chat real quick. Dr. Ingram is encouraging trainees to get disability insurance as early as possible, which Dr. Thomas sorry, Dr. Duncan also agreed with. And feel free to also add anything, Dr. Duncan, if you have any information.
Yeah, I will be. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if anybody has any other specific questions, I'll chat them in.
Yeah, and then there's one. Sorry, I just want to. Dr. Duncan also mentioned hiring a financial advisor based on a fee-only payment schedule. So a financial advisor who has any of these titles behind their name, CFA, CFP. Can you just talk a little bit more about that, just really briefly before we go into your slides? Dr. Duncan, you're muted. You want to unmute? Dr. Duncan, maybe you have to unmute your.
Oh, there we go. Hello, everyone, and I'd like to thank the WASD, the East, and the SCC PDS for the privilege of the podium. Just like Dr. Bonnie mentioned, I am no expert at the information I'm given at this point in time. I'm not a financial advisor, but I've learned along the way in my career, as well as done some research myself on this salient topic. So once again, I'm Thomas Duncan, and I'm glad to be here. I have no disclosures. So some of the objectives that we have today are to discuss the different pay models, as well as we're going to learn about RVUs, or relative value units, and how important it is to have professional liability insurance. And then we want to discuss how to maximize the retirement benefits and pre-tax earnings. And also we'll discuss a little bit more about life and disability insurance. So we have different pay models. As most of you know, the solo type is an individual who has his or her own practice. They essentially bill for themselves, conduct procedures, run their office, and they take home everything that they make and don't necessarily have to share it with anyone except for their office staff. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And a group practice has 2 or more individuals in it. It could be a single specialty group or a multi-specialty group, but essentially they run the show and share the profits. And then you have the large HMOs that generally employ physicians to do the work, and they have separate contracts to go along with that. You know, either a salary only contract or a salary contract with some benefits or some incentives to go along with it. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that also. And then we have the academics, which has to do with being in a center that does say research, teaching of medical students and residents, as well as some community events, or you represent the academic center in the community. And there are different models of contracts that are held in that facility. Now, I'd like to mention that back in the 80s/early 90s, there were a lot of salary only contracts, and these have mostly gone to the wayside, but there are other models that are in play. And then we have the hospital-based physicians or the hospitalists that are generally hired by the hospital, and they have their either separate incentives added to their main bonus, or rather their main base, which is a bonus, or they have what's called RVU based into it, and there's a calculation that we'll do to get to that RVU level. And that's locum tenens. Locum tenens has to do with a company that hires you. It hires you to go out into, say, a rural area, or may not even be a rural area, to provide services for, say, a weekend or a week or a month at a time or 6 months at a time, all depending on how much care they need in that area. And in that respect, they pay for your transportation, they pay for your food, they pay for your lodging, and you don't have to worry about anything except for showing up and doing the work. So those are different types of models. Now, the straight salary we talked about a little bit. Now, this is easy to do because it's transparent. You know, you have a check coming in once a month or twice a month, however it's fashioned. And the only disadvantages are there are no clinical productivity incentives. So if you see 10 patients in a clinic versus 20 patients within that same time frame, you don't necessarily make any difference in pay. So it behooves you not to work any harder. So there are no incentives to work any harder. And then you've got the salary and the productivity, which I mentioned a tad bit. And this has to do with having a salary, and then you have a productivity incentive basis on it, such that once you have your salary as a base and you meet those metrics for the bonus, then you get your bonus either every quarter or every 6 months or every year. And this may be a little challenging to calibrate, but some models follow this fashion. And then we have the salary and outcomes in regards to having your base and then other quality measures that you need to meet. For example, there's a facility in California that takes away at 1% of the surgeon's salary or withholds it, and the surgeon is supposed to earn it back based on metrics such as seeing a patient within 7 days of contact in the office, or you have pre-op antibodies that need to be administered within an hour of an operation, or you have VT prophylaxis that needs to be administered. So if you meet those measures, then you get your 1% back. If you meet one of those measures, you get 33% back. If you meet only 2/3, then you get 66% back. And there's a pure productivity incentive in which you have your payment that is based on after cost. So you get a lump sum of money from producing services, and then you get a cost of the amount that you get to yourself or your partner that you work with, and then you get a percentage of the extra monies that you accrue from the services you provide. But it generates a lot of competition, particularly with the RVUs, and I'll discuss that probably on the next slide. So essentially the model of the solo practitioner is the quote unquote eat what you kill mantra, but then again, that's going to the wayside because we don't have a lot of solo practitioners in our system. And then, you know, I mentioned the straight salary and a year-end bonus, but the volume-based approach is now going to the wayside because, like I mentioned before, you don't necessarily have any incentive to work any harder because it's more of a, you know, volume-based. You can see 10 patients or 20 patients, and it doesn't make a difference. You get the same amount of income. And we're now evolving into a value-based system, which, you know, takes care of the non-clinical activities such as doing research, doing, you know, or having the titles such as a chief of department or chief of staff or other non-clinical activities, which takes away from you doing your regular work, and it's non-RVU work, but it compensates you for it. So that's a model that works out well because you want to be able to be compensated for work that you are doing that is not necessarily clinical. Otherwise, you know, if you're RVU based, then you'll end up neglecting any non-clinical activities and ultimately focusing on clinical activities to be able to meet that RVU level. So the value-based system is not a one-size-fits-all because in the academic setting, you know, you may be expected to do research, you may be expected to teach, you may be expected to do conferences, go out into the community, etc., as opposed to a rural system in which the physicians are expected to show up and provide services. And even if the hospital isn't being used to its full capacity, but the fact that you're available is what you're compensated for, and versus other systems like the urban or suburban medical centers. And it's got to be transparent. It's got to be transparent, because if the administration isn't transparent to you and gives you that goal, and both your goals aren't aligned, then you lose trust. You lose trust in the system, and when trust breaks down, and that's where we have things go awry. Now, what are RVUs? Now, RVUs are an economic, essentially, method of physicians' work. Their practice expands, how much it takes to maintain that practice, as well as their professional liability. And there's something called the conversion factor, and the geographic adjustment based on where you live in the country, because the funding is different from one part of the country to the other. And this is all based on MGMA numbers, which is Medical Group Management Association numbers, which can be obtained. You have to pay a fee to obtain the numbers of the reimbursement based on the part of the country that you are. And the formula is somewhat complex, and I'll show it to you on the next slide. And questions have been asked about whether there should be some psychological value associated to the RVU calculation, essentially because it's so complex. And it induces incentivization, although if you're in a multi-specialty group and you have a physician that's doing more procedures that are higher RVU based than others, then there may be dissent in that group, because they're a group of physicians that may be producing more RVUs, while others are producing less RVUs, yet you have to end up sharing the profits equitably at the end of the day, or you may have it built into your system to have the profits shared based on the percentage of RVUs that are produced. So, there's some systems in which you can game it. For example, if there's an OBGYN, and I'll use that as an example because it makes sense. If then OBGYN has a contract that says you have a base and you have RVUs that you need to meet, and after those RVUs, say 6,000 a year, you can get X number of dollars per RVU, let's say $40 per RVU. The clinician can assist multiple OBGYNs in the system and use a -80, which is the assistant modifier, and then gain RVUs for it. And that way they end up getting more RVUs. Now, I give you an example over here of a CPT code for, say, a moderate visit, follow-up visit in a clinic, 99214, that has only 1.92 RVUs. The more procedures you do, the more RVUs are generated. A colonoscopy, 45378, has 11 RVUs. Compare that to a lab chole, 47562, that has less than 11 RVUs. But if you think about it, for colonoscopies, you do maybe a 10 to 15 minute procedure. For a lab chole, it's maybe half an hour to an hour, all depending on the complexity or even more. But yet the RVUs aren't as much as a colonoscopy. But a partial colectomy has RVUs of 21. So if you have somebody in the group that's doing more colectomies, then they end up generating more RVUs. Now, Whipple has 53 RVUs. So you can see how you can build up more RVUs that way. And here's the physician fee schedule payment rates and the complex formula that we have for the RVUs, calculating the work RVUs plus the GPCI, which is the practice location index, and so on and so forth. So it's really complex, and generally we try to stay away from it, although there are some systems that still use it, but you need to understand what is ongoing in the RVU calculation to be able to make it of benefit to you when you're negotiating for your contract. And a lot of hospital systems may use the RVU system, less so the individual groups. And like I mentioned, it's based on the MGMA numbers. And beware of those multi-specialty groups that may cause dissent amongst each other, and the assistant factor. Now, when you have advanced practice providers or physician extenders in your system, you can also bill for them and accrue extra RVUs that way. But comparing 2021 to 2022, the CMS flat rate, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid flat rate for surgeons was $34.60 for RVUs. Now, last year it was $34.89. So it's gone down by 0.82%. And it's going to keep going down if we don't advocate for ourselves. And hence the reason why we have Dr. John Armstrong preaching to us about advocacy. And MACRA, which is a term that's thrown around quite a bit, is known as the Medicare Access and Children's Health Insurance Program Reauthorization Act. And this came about in 2015. And this prevented the accruement of the percentage increase from year to year of the CMS rates for surgeons and other clinicians. So the professional liability insurance is also known as errors and omissions. And the medical malpractice is also known as errors and omissions, but it provides coverage for financial losses for negligence, as opposed to medical malpractice, which provides coverage for loss of the human body parts or injury to it. And it's required in some states, but not in all states. And generally, it'll cover you for some legal representation and protect you from monies that you will never make. And it all depends on your business size, as well as the activities of your business and how much protection you need. So we'll talk a little bit about IRAs. The IRAs, and Dr. Bonne spoke about this at length, so I'll just go through the numbers. And generally for IRAs, you can put aside up to $6,000 by age 50, and then $7,000 if you're over the age of 50. And you can tax defer for the traditional IRAs. So you put in money, it's tax deferred. Your average yearly income will go down, and you don't have to pay taxes on that. But when you're taking out the money on the back end, hopefully during retirement, then you end up paying taxes. With a Roth, you pay taxes up front, and then later on when you're taking out the money on the back end, you don't necessarily have to pay taxes, but you have to qualify based on your income for these separate Roth ideas. And there's a backdoor Roth, which you can always ask your financial advisor about to qualify for. Now, for the 401ks or the 403bs, and those grow tax deferred. And generally you have those, you have a lump sum of money that you put away every month, and generally you don't pay taxes on it initially. And subsequently, when you're taking it out on the back end, you pay taxes on it, and your tax burden is reduced as such. And generally, when you're 59 and a half or over, you can withdraw without any penalties. Less than the age of 59 and a half, then you tend to pay a penalty for withdrawing it. Although there are times in which if you withdraw it and use some of the money for some expense, but you pay it back within 30 days, it doesn't count against you. So you can put aside up to $20,500 up to the age of 50 every year, based on the 2022 numbers, and $26,500 per year after the age of 50. Although you can maximize that based on your income to $56,000 a year. And I try to do that each year to maximize that amount. So it's best to have a Roth IRA while you're in the low income tax bracket, when you're a resident or a fellow, or you haven't started making any extra income per se, because that way you pay low taxes on it. And when you're taking it out on the back end, you're not taxed. But if you have a high income, then you want to defer paying taxes until later on. In regards to life insurance, term life insurance is less expensive, a heck of a lot less expensive than whole life insurance, because it has a set period in which you're covered for, and then the premium stays the same, and the payout amount is pretty much guaranteed. So you don't get anything out of it until you die or your beneficiaries. And that's the only difference between that and the whole life, which is more of an investment potential, which Dr. Bonne spoke about. But you have to pay for your entire life. And if you don't cash out, and it takes a while to be able to cash out the whole life insurance, but if you don't cash it out, then it ends up being lost. and your beneficiaries get whatever is left of it. So stay away from whole life insurance. And a lot of people will get pigeonholed into buying it, but I advise you to stay away from it. Disability insurance, it depends on your line of work, depends on your age. The older you are, the more expensive it is, depends on your occupation. As physicians or surgeons, your premiums will tend to be a little higher because you're more of a higher risk. And then the amount of income you make is all used in an equation to determine exactly how much you will be paying as far as your insurance premiums. Now, the individual plans are pretty much guaranteed, and you want a non-cancelable and guaranteed renewable plan. That's what you want to sign up for, and make it true owner occupied or occupation based. Otherwise, if it's not defined, then you may end up getting into some trouble in regards to if you get disabled and need some payment. And it'll pay you up to your monthly income, but maybe not entirely. It'll pay maybe up to 65% of it. So you need to keep that in mind. And if you have any pre-existing conditions, it's very difficult to sign up for these. For example, if you have a cancer, or if you've had a cancer, or if you have heart disease, it's difficult to sign up for an individual plan. And one thing I found when I was doing some research is the fact that if you're a female, it's more expensive because they consider pregnancy or childbearing a risk factor, which is mind-blowing to me, but they consider that. So it behooves you to sign up for it before any childbearing comes into age. And it could be partial or residual or inflation based. And the group plans are better for those that have pre-existing conditions, because you can get involved in a group plan and sign up for it without paying a very high rate for your plan. And it can be modified from year to year, or the premium can be raised. So that's the only thing you have to watch out for. But it essentially provides a percentage of your monthly income. So in conclusion, the devil's in the details, and you want to diversify your investments, just like Dr. Bonne mentioned, and then maximize those contributions while you're younger and even as you're in your mid-career, and so that you have a lot put aside for later dates. And strongly consider a financial planner, because they'll help you along. And exactly which one you choose will be determined by what you want to obtain out of the plans you sign up for. And then consider the fact that when you have a loan that's given to a family member, that it's a gift and don't expect to get it back. And if you have that in your mind, then you wouldn't be upset with your family. And resist whole life insurance or universal life insurance, and strongly consider professional liability insurance. Disability insurance is a must. I can't overemphasize that. And don't sign up for any contract that is not reviewed by either an expert or one of your attending staff or one of your colleagues who's had much more experience than yourself with contracts, because it'll save you a lot of headache. And advocacy is key. So live like a resident in your first few years out of training, and you will be all right. So here are some of my references, and I'll be glad to take any questions if there are any. Here's my Twitter feed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duncan. That was an excellent presentation. It looks like Dr. Bonnie's still on. I was afraid that she was going to have to leave early, but either Dr. Duncan or Dr. Bonnie can answer these questions. I have a few questions that were sent directly to me. One is, what is the physician mortgage program?
That's a really good question. I think I feel like I looked into this at some point. I think it's a variable mortgage where it's like your payments are lower early on, and then and you can get a jumbo loan without the any loan greater than, I think it's like 456,000 or something like that. Any mortgage greater than that is considered a jumbo mortgage, and then you have to have PMI, which is private mortgage insurance. And that is an additional cost that's added onto your monthly mortgage fee, and basically until your mortgage is paid down to that 457 level, because what they're saying is, hang on, you don't have any money yet. So that's how private mortgage insurance works. And I believe that physician programs sort of recognize that you're probably pretty reliable and that you're probably going to have a really good income potential. And so they remove the PMI from your mortgage if you're buying like $1 million house.
Yeah, that's correct, because if you don't have 20% down when you're purchasing a home, then you get a PMI added onto it. And so with these physician loans, or loans that targeted at physicians, then you can put down, say, 5 or 10% and not have the PMI, just like Dr. Bonne was saying.
Yeah, the other place that you can avoid PMI is if you look and see if your employer has an employer credit union. They will often give PMI-free mortgages to people who are in their credit union, because it's like an employer benefit.
You're on mute.
You're muted, Fariha.
Sorry, a few more questions for both of you. Is it better to use a few diversified ETFs in a portfolio or buy individual blue chip stocks?
I mean, that depends on your risk aversity. If you're risk averse, you always want to be diversified, because if something, goes down, if you, I've personally never played in stocks, like stocks, but where stocks actually do come into benefit, it's usually not going to be in medicine unless you're somehow bought into like the enterprise, like your healthcare system. If you're in a for-profit system, but if you have a partner or spouse or somebody else that works for like a company, a publicly traded company, then you may be able to buy stock options. And if you can purchase stock options while the stock is low, like you always want to do that, because typically there'll be stock. Basically, you're paying now the stock rate now, and then you get the stock in 5 years. And so you end up purchasing stock at a lower rate than what it's anticipated. Now, if the company bottoms out, then your stock options are worthless, but they typically tend to be very cheap, or they may be distributed like as a portion of a bonus or something like that. And so typically you want to do that if you can. And then we have a bunch of stock from my husband's companies, but not otherwise.
Thank you. Dr. Duncan?
Yes, and I think you want to end up diversifying. I mean, the thought is that you don't want to be a frantic investor, because if you look at the stocks and the way they're going these days, it's a big roller coaster. And back in the 2007 era, when people lost a lot of their stocks, they took a big hit. So the thinking is that when you invest, you want to diversify, and you will have roller coasters, but eventually it'll rebound. And so if you have your stocks in the high end area, then you may end up losing a lot. But if you diversify, and you can hold on to some of your money and eventually be okay at the end of the day. So you don't necessarily want to put everything in the high-end stocks, otherwise you end up losing more, and it's more painful for you. And if you're close to retirement and you have your stocks in the high-end area and you lose them, and that goes your retirement. And it's really painful to see some of these elder individuals who have lost their stock options and now are still working because they've lost most of what they put aside in the past.
Okay, we have about a minute left, so just real quick, last question. In terms of getting a financial advisor, do you suggest starting that once you become an attending, or is there any role when you are in your fellowship training?
I did it when I became an attending. I think there's sort of that's two questions. You want to, if you have children and you want to make sure that you have protection and, you know, life insurance and things like that. But you're not making anything as a resident, right? So your employer provided life insurance is probably a good buy. It will take care of it in residency, but just know that you're not buying life insurance based on your income potential. You're only buying it on your residency income. I did it when I became an attending because it was like the first time that there was real money involved in any of these decisions. I think the one decision that you should make in your training is one, if you have a point, like either at the end of medical school or the end of your forbearance on your student loans where your interest is going to capitalize, you should try to pay off the interest, because now you're paying interest on interest. And then the other thing is, as much as you can or you can afford to, when your income is very low and you're in a low tax bracket, just invest in your Roths if you can afford to put that money aside. The financial advisor credentials, you should be able to find that on the websites of the financial advisors, and they should be able to describe to you what a fiduciary responsibility is. And if they're not doing that, then they're not a fiduciary. I actually find that this is a really good place where maybe you want to reach out to your network and get advice from people who have somebody that they like, that they feel like has been very responsible. I mean, this is one of those places where just interpersonal connection is really important.
Dr. Duncan, any last thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with Dr. Bonne. And yes, in residency, I didn't have a financial advisor, and it was only after I graduated and subsequently, you know, had extra money in my pockets that I signed up with a financial advisor and obtained one from the institution that I work. And, you know, I didn't have anyone particular that I knew per se, and just trusted the individual that I worked with. Although now that I know what I do, to look for an individual that has the credentials and so on and so forth makes a big difference. Though I've been lucky with the one that I have, who's been able to direct us accordingly based on our finances. So I think it's always great to reach out to your network, like Dr. Bonne said, because that's the beauty of being involved in the WST or the East or the SCC-PDS, because you can reach out to multiple people who've been there and done that and have made mistakes along the way, and now they can direct you accordingly and keep you out of trouble.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Duncan and Dr. Bonne, for speaking with us today. And I want to thank you, everyone, for attending today's professional development webinar. I'd like to remind you that we have another professional development webinar that will be coming up, and you're going to receive information on that soon. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night.